The new Acer Helios 300 and Lenovo Y540 are great gaming laptops at around the $1,200 price point. But what are the differences, and which one should you get? In this detailed comparison, I'll look at pretty much everything and help you decide which one is right for you. First, let's cover the differences in specs between the two units I'm testing. Both are pretty similar. They've got the same Intel i7-9750H CPU, NVIDIA GTX 1660 Ti graphics, and 16GB of memory and dual channel. Both have M.2 NVMe SSDs. My Helios 300 happens to have a 256GB one, while my Y540 has a 512GB one, but this will vary based on where you're buying. Both have a 15.6-inch 1080p screen with either 144Hz or 60Hz refresh rate, and both have Gigabit Ethernet, 802.11ac Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth 5 for network connectivity. Both laptops are available with different specs though. You can find examples and updated prices linked in the description. Both have black lids, matte black aluminium for the Helios with blue accents around the Predator logo in the middle, and black plastic with a grooved finish and subtle Legion branding on the side for the Y540. The interior of the Helios was the same matte black metal with some more blue accenting, while the Y540 was also matte black but seemed to be coated in some sort of rubberized material. Overall, the build quality of both machines felt good. I'll give a slight edge to the Helios for using more metal though. In terms of weight, my Helios 300 was around 200 grams heavier. However, it does also have a 2.5-inch drive installed while the Y540 does not. Once we include power bricks, the total weight of the Y540 is now around 200 grams more, meaning its large 230-watt power brick alone must weigh around 400 grams more than the 180-watt brick that comes with the Helios. As for the size differences, the Y540 is slightly larger in every dimension, though I wouldn't consider either large for a 15-inch machine. As for the screen differences, both of my laptops had 1080p 60Hz IPS panels, so expect different results with the 144Hz options that most people are likely to buy for gaming. The Helios 300 had better color gamut, was brighter, and had a higher contrast ratio, so was all round just a little better. It was the same deal when it came to backlight bleed. The Helios 300 looks quite fine when we compare it against the panel in the Y540. Though that said, I didn't have issues with either while viewing darker content, and this will vary between laptops anyway. Neither laptop has G-Sync, however the Y540 does give us the option of enabling or disabling hybrid mode through the Lenovo Vantage software, which is their control panel. Enabling hybrid mode will give us better battery life with NVIDIA Optimus, as this will use the Intel graphics outside of gaming, while disabling hybrid mode will give us better performance in games by bypassing Optimus, but at the expense of worse battery life outside of gaming. It just takes a reboot to swap between the two modes. Both had some screen flex, and I found them pretty sturdy, as the lid of the Helios is metal, while the Y540 is plastic, but was also thicker. The screen on the Y540 also goes all the way back, if that's important to you. Both machines could be opened up easily with one finger, demonstrating that weight is somewhat evenly distributed and not all up the back. Both felt stable sitting on my lap. While both have thin screen bezels, the Helios 300 was able to keep its camera up the top of the panel, while the Y540 has it down the bottom below the screen.
The 720p camera is about average. It looks okay, but still a bit blurry, and the microphone sounds about average too. Here's what typing sounds like, and here's what it sounds like when you hit the turbo button and boost the fan speed. The 720p camera just isn't very good. It's a nose cam, so when you type, your fingers kind of get in the way, and if I want to be properly in the frame, I've got to move it right back, and it's just not very good.
The keyboards were fairly similar. The Helios has a shorter right shift key and blue accented WASD and arrow keys. And mine also had RGB backlighting, but that varies between models. I thought the Y540 looked cleaner in comparison. It only has white backlighting, but there were no colored accents. Both laptops light up all keys, including secondary functions, and you can turn off lighting if you prefer. Here's what typing sounds like with both to give you an idea of what to expect. If I had to pick, I'd say I liked typing on the Y540 a little more. The keys just felt a bit nicer to me. The Helios also has a dedicated button to enable turbo mode above the keyboard on the left. More on this later. Both touchpads use precision drivers, were smooth to the touch, and worked well. The one on the Helios clicks down anywhere, while the Y540's does not, as it instead has dedicated left and right click buttons which make audible clicks. I liked that the touchpad on the Helios was larger, however in the end, I think I liked using the one in the Y540 more. There was some flex while pushing down on both, perhaps just a tiny bit more with the Y540 as it's plastic rather than metal like the Helios. However, this wasn't an issue for either during normal everyday use. Both machines show up fingerprints quite easily, and although they both have smooth surfaces, they were easier to clean off the Helios 300, as the Y540 has that rubberized texture. The I/O is quite a bit different, at least in terms of layout. On the left, the Y540 has a USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A port and 3.5mm audio jack, while the Helios 300 has a Kensington lock, power input, status LEDs, gigabit Ethernet, two USB 3 Type A ports, and 3.5mm audio jack. On the right, the Y540 is keeping things simple again, with just a single USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A port, while the Helios 300 has a USB 3 Type C port, no Thunderbolt though, a third USB 3 Type A port, mini DisplayPort 1.4, and HDMI 2.0 outputs. On the back, the Helios just has air exhaust vents, while the Y540 also has the rest of its I/O. From left to right, it's got a USB Type-C port, again no Thunderbolt here either. Mini DisplayPort 1.4, third USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A port, HDMI 2.0 output, gigabit Ethernet, power input, and Kensington lock. The Y540 also has icons above all of the ports so you can easily see where you need to plug a cable in when standing over it from the front, without the need to turn the machine around. There's nothing on the front of either machine. For those keeping track, we've essentially got the same I/O on both machines, just placed in different locations. Personally, I prefer the layout of the Y540. The sides are kept clean, so no cables to get in the way of your mouse hand. All the thicker cables run out the back and out of the way. For instance, the head of the charger on the Helios does slightly obstruct the side air exhaust vent, though I didn't find this to do anything when testing thermals. Underneath, both have air intake vents towards the back of the machine, and the design of the Y540 looks a bit cleaner. We can also see the speakers here, both are towards the front left and right corners, actually on the front for the Y540 and towards the sides on the Helios. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to them side by side, so can't directly compare them. However, when looking at max volume, the Helios seems to get louder. I found the latency mod results on the Y540 to look quite good, while some issues were detected on the Helios in this test. The Helios 300 also plays this sound by default on boot. You can turn it off through the Predator Sense software or in the BIOS though. Speaking of the BIOS, here's a super quick run through of each of them. Both are quite basic and locked down with not really many advanced options available to the user. The bottom panels can be removed by taking out 10 Phillips head screws for the Helios and 11 for the Y540. The overall layout isn't too different. Single 2.5-inch drive bay down the front left, an M.2 slot next to it. However, the Helios has two M.2 slots for storage, while the Y540 just has the one. Both have two memory slots in the center and a Wi-Fi card found on the left for the Helios and right for the Y540. While the 57 watt-hour battery in the Y540 looks a little bigger due to the L shape, it's actually slightly smaller compared to the 58 watt-hour one in the Helios. I've tested both machines with the screen at 50% brightness, background apps disabled, and keyboard lighting off. While just watching YouTube videos, I actually found the Y540 to last 21 minutes or 6% longer. The Y540 allows us to disable hybrid mode, which uses Optimus to swap to the Intel graphics for improved battery life. And as expected, it burns battery much faster in this mode as we're using the NVIDIA GTX 1660 Ti the entire time, which is less power efficient. While playing The Witcher 3 with NVIDIA's battery boost set to 30 FPS, the Helios lasted a little longer. However, the Y540 dipped to 10 FPS 48 minutes in with 25% charge remaining. So in terms of gaming on battery, the Helios 300 seems to do better. It's worth noting the Helios 300 undervolts the CPU by default, which would help improve its battery life a little. Now let's take a look at thermals. Both laptops were tested in an ambient room temperature of 21 degrees Celsius with the same settings. So this should be a fairly apples to apples comparison, or at least as close as we can get. By default out of the box, the Helios 300 has a minus 0.125 volt undervolt applied to the CPU, while the Y540 does not. In the upcoming tests, I've tested the Helios 300 with turbo mode and the Y540 in performance mode, and both are the highest option you can set through their respective control panels. With the Helios, turbo mode maxes the fan speed, raises the power limits, and overclocks the graphics. With the Y540, performance mode boosts the power limit, and I've manually applied the same GPU overclock and CPU undervolt to match the Helios for a fair comparison. If you want to see the full results for both machines without undervolting, check the links to the full reviews in the description. These are the CPU temperatures of both machines while under combined CPU and GPU loads. We'll check the GPU results in the next graph, so for now just keep in mind these are CPU only results but for combined loads. The stress test results are from running the Acer 64 and Heaven benchmark at the same time, while the gaming results are from playing Watch Dogs 2. In this case, the Helios was 3 to 4 degrees cooler. When we look at the GPU results for these same combined CPU and GPU workloads, the Helios is again cooler, this time by 4 to 5 degrees, though no thermal throttling with either machine in these tests, so not the end of the world. These are the CPU clock speeds while running these same tests. For the most part, the results were quite close, especially while running the stress test, as we know that performs the same workload, while the gaming results can vary a little simply based on what's going on in the game at the time, even though I do perform the same test run. These are the GPU clock speeds in these same tests, and I found both machines were extremely close together here. Again, keep in mind both machines have the same GPU overclocks applied for this test. Here's what we're looking at in terms of Cinebench R20 scores from both machines. At stock, the Helios 300 is ahead due to its default undervolt. However, once we undervolt the Y540, it takes the lead. This is because while under a CPU-only workload, the Y540 actually allowed the CPU to run up to 60 watts. So the power limit for CPU-only load is higher. Basically, this means higher performance for the Y540 for CPU-only work, where the NVIDIA graphics is not being used. So outside of games, for instance. As for the areas where you'll actually be putting your hands, at idle the Y540 was noticeably warmer. While under combined CPU and GPU stress test, the Y540 was again warmer to the touch than the Helios 300, though as you'll hear next, there's quite a difference in fan speeds. At idle, it was possible to run the Y540 completely silent in quiet mode, which explains the warmer idle results. Even at stock settings on the Helios, it's louder than performance mode on the Y540. And when we enable turbo mode on the Helios, the fans get significantly louder when compared to the highest possible from the Y540. Overall, there aren't too many differences in terms of thermals once both have the same undervolt applied to the CPU. The Helios 300 was cooler though due to the faster fans, but that does come at the expense of a louder system. It's a trade-off. At least the Helios allows you to adjust the fan speed though. You don't get that option with the Y540 at the moment. I say at the moment because Lenovo seem to update fan curves regularly with BIOS updates. Next, let's compare some games. As both laptops were tested at different times, different NVIDIA drivers were in use. However, I've explicitly not included results in games that NVIDIA noted the newer drivers improved, such as The Division 2. I've also included results with the Y540 both at stock and while undervolted and overclocked, so we can attempt a more apples-to-apples comparison with the Helios 300. The main differences between them in this customized state is that the Helios 300 has a higher CPU power limit under combined CPU and GPU load, and higher fan speeds. However, the Y540 has the option to disable hybrid mode, and I utilized this here. It requires a reboot, but this means the NVIDIA graphics is connected directly to the screen, which can boost performance compared to using Optimus, which is what the Helios is using. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode, so the exact same test run was done for each result. I've got the Helios 300 results in the top bar, then the Lenovo Y540 in the 2 bars below. The middle bar represents the custom settings I put in place for the Y540, so the same CPU undervolt and same GPU overclock as the Helios out of the box. Though as discussed earlier, the Helios 300 does still have a higher CPU power limit. The bottom bar shows the Y540 at stock out of the box settings, as I thought it would be useful to show the difference these changes are making, especially if you don't plan on customizing your Y540. In this test with our custom settings in place, the Y540 was ahead of the Helios 300 in average FPS and 1% low. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and this time the Acer Helios 300 was scoring the highest, coming in 9% ahead of the stock Y540, but only 3% ahead of it once we put those custom settings in place. So the gap does close a fair bit if you're willing to tweak the Y540 a little. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and this is a fairly CPU-heavy test. In this test, the Y540 with the same modifications in place as the Helios is only just slightly behind for the 1% low, but about 1 FPS ahead in terms of average result. Overall, quite close. Fortnite was tested using the replay feature, And full disclaimer, as I tested the Y540 after the Helios, I didn't use the exact same replay file, as the game updates frequently. However, I did perform the same test pass through the game, so it should still be quite comparable. In this test, the average frame rate between the two is basically the same with the tweaks in place. However, the 1% low from the Y540 is still behind, which I suspect may be due to the lower CPU power limit on that machine. But honestly, still good performance from either at max settings, and I doubt you'd notice a difference. PUBG was also tested using the replay feature. Again, different replay files were used, however I performed the exact same run through the game for this testing, so I believe the results are comparable. In this case, the Y540 was already performing closely to the Helios 300 at stock, but then with the modifications to the Y540, it pulls out slightly ahead. Dota 2 was tested in the middle lane with an average amount of action going on. In this case, even the stock Y540 was ahead of the Helios 300, and I believe this is a good example that shows the improvement we can see with hybrid mode disabled. Once you start hitting really high frame rates, the Intel integrated graphics becomes more of a bottleneck compared to having the screen connected directly to the Nvidia graphics. So the Y540 has an advantage here in average FPS. As this game seems to rely more on the CPU than the GPU, we're seeing a nice boost to 1% low with the undervolt in place with the custom settings on the Y540. CSGO was tested with the Theoretical FPS benchmark, and is another example that shows the advantages of being able to disable the Intel graphics. Again, the Y540 was outperforming the Helios 300, at least in terms of average FPS, due to the option of disabling hybrid mode and only using the Nvidia graphics. The 1% low result was also ahead of the Helios 300 once we undervolt the Y540 and put them on even footing. Overwatch was tested in the practice range, and despite the fairly high frame rate here, I wasn't really seeing a big improvement like before with hybrid mode disabled. That said, once we put the same changes in place on the Y540 that the Helios 300 has out of the box, the results are much closer together, with a very small edge to the Helios. But again, I doubt it's a difference you'd actually notice practically. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark, and there's no major differences between either of these machines regardless of the settings. I found this to be more of a CPU-heavy test, so it makes sense that the Y540 is seeing a little improvement with the custom settings. And this puts it just slightly ahead of the Helios 300. But again, it's such a small amount, it hardly matters in the real world. Watch Dogs 2 is another game that's heavy on the CPU, which is why I believe we're seeing nice improvements to 1% low and average FPS once we put the custom settings in place. It's still just behind the Helios 300, but again, I think it's close enough to the point where you're not really going to be able to tell. The Witcher 3 is a fairly GPU demanding game, and with the custom settings on the Y540, we're able to boost up the average frame rate to match and actually slightly beat the Helios 300. However, the 1% low is a fair bit lower in comparison. The undervolt did improve this slightly, but the higher power limit on the CPU with the Helios 300 must be making more of a difference here. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and while the average frame rate increased with the custom settings to be quite close with the Helios, the 1% low did actually drop back a little here, giving an overall edge to the Helios in this title. Doom was tested as a Vulkan title to see if they behave much differently, and it doesn't really seem to matter. At stock, the Y540 was already very close to the Helios 300, likely due to hybrid mode being disabled as we're running at quite high frame rates here. But the custom settings allow it to take the lead with a 6% higher average frame rate. On average, over these 13 games tested, when we compare the stock out-of-the-box results from the Helios 300 against the stock results from the Y540, we're seeing the Helios getting 4.4% higher average FPS at the highest setting presets. The results look good for the Helios, only losing out in 3 of the 13 games. That is until we also apply the same CPU undervolt and GPU overclocks to the Y540 that the Helios 300 has by default, making things fairer. When we do this, the Y540 is now actually outperforming the Helios in 9 of the 13 games, most likely due to its ability to disable hybrid mode and avoid the limitations associated with Optimus, which should give it an advantage. I've also got the overall scores for 3D Mark, Firestrike, and TimeSpy benchmarks. Like the games, the custom settings with the Y540 are closing the gap, though the Helios 300 did still have a slight lead in both tests. I've tested storage with Crystal Disk Mark. My Helios 300 came to me with a 256GB NVMe SSD, while the Y540 came with a 512GB NVMe SSD. Those storage sizes will vary. With the specific drives that my machines had, the Y540 was clearly ahead both in terms of reads and writes. While both machines have a 2.5-inch drive bay, only my Helios 300 came with a hard drive installed. but again, this will vary depending on where you buy. For updated pricing, check the links in the description, as prices will change over time. At the time of recording, the Acer Helios 300 is going for $1,200 US, while the Lenovo Y540 is $1,260 US, assuming you get the 144Hz screen. It's actually $1,100 with the 60Hz panel. Anyway, assuming same panel, CPU, memory, and graphics, the Y540 is $60 US more. Although it does also have 4 times the SSD space, which to me seems justified for that extra cost. Both do regularly have sales though. For instance, on Prime Day, the Helios 300 was $999 US on Amazon, an excellent deal. Here in Australia, the Y540 is much better value compared to the Helios 300, so a perfect example showing that it varies by region. I got my Y540 on sale for 1,570 Australian dollars, while the Helios 300 currently goes for 2,200 Australian dollars. Granted, I did buy my Y540 with single channel memory and upgrade it myself, but even factoring in that cost, there's still a huge difference between the two. Lenovo give you the option to pay 125 Australian dollars to get 2 8GB sticks. And while a bit pricey, even if you do take this path so you don't have to do it yourself, it's still 500 Australian dollars cheaper than the Helios. This is just a straight up amazing deal here in Australia. Removing our tax and converting to US dollars, that puts the single channel Y540 in at around $966 US just for comparison. So both laptops are priced similarly and competitively. Let's summarize the good and the bad aspects of each machine and find out which is worth it. The Helios 300 clearly has more of a gamer-looking design aesthetic. Personally, I prefer the cleaner professional design of the Y540, but that's always going to come down to personal taste. The Y540 has the Mux switch, a nice advantage that I wish all laptops had, as this gives the user the choice of running the machine with Optimus for improved battery life, or rebooting to swap to the Nvidia graphics only for improved gaming performance. The Helios had a slightly better screen compared to the Y540, at least when comparing the 60Hz variants of each machine. Expect different results with the 144Hz panels. The Helios also seems to be a bit sturdier overall due to the metal build. The Y540 was more plastic. The Helios is also a little smaller than the Y540 in all dimensions. Though in terms of laptop only, I did find it to weigh a little more than the Y540. Once we add in the power bricks though, the Y540 is the heavier overall package, as it's got a massive power brick, potentially making it less portable. Both machines get great battery life for gaming laptops though, so maybe you won't need the charger that often. Outside of gaming, the Y540 lasted 6% longer than the Helios. However, while gaming on battery power, not only did the Helios last longer, but it was able to keep the frame rate higher for longer. So if you plan on actually playing games on battery power, the Helios seems to do better in that area. In terms of upgradability, the Helios has the option of 2 M.2 drives in addition to the single 2.5-inch drive bay, while the Y540 only has space for a single M.2 drive, but does also have the 2.5-inch drive spot. In terms of thermals, there's not really that much difference once we undervolted the Y540. The Helios 300 was cooler, however that's mostly going to be down to the faster and louder fans in turbo mode. In terms of clock speeds, while under the same tests, we were seeing similar results from either machine. For CPU-only workloads, the Y540 has the advantage as it's configured with a higher power limit, as was seen by the higher Cinebench results. Lenovo aren't currently allowing you the option to manually set the fan speed to maximum, something that was possible with the older Y530, and as this can be done in the Helios, we're seeing better temperatures. While under the same levels of load, the Y540 was noticeably quieter due to this, especially once you enable turbo mode on the Helios, which boosts the fan speed. Given I didn't see thermal throttling on the Y540, I think most people would be happier to run quieter with similar performance. But it would still be better if they added the option to manually set max fan speed in future. Once we put the same CPU undervolt and GPU overclock on the Y540, the game performance is quite similar. In the 13 games I tested at max setting levels, the Y540 was ahead in 9 of them, likely due to the option of disabling hybrid mode that the Helios does not offer. To me, this appears to make the Y540 a better platform if you're willing to undervolt and overclock yourself. We can always change these things on our own, but we can't make the Helios run without the Intel graphics unless we plug in an external monitor. If you're willing to make these changes yourself, there's no real difference between the two in terms of game performance that you'd actually practically notice. If you're not willing to follow some basic overclocking and undervolting guides, then the Helios 300 does perform better out of the box, as Acer are already doing these things for you by default. I preferred that the majority of the I/O on the Y540 was out the back and out of the way of your mouse hand, and I also liked typing on the keyboard more and using the touchpad. Overall, it looks like I'm leaning towards picking the Y540 myself as the winner. In the US, it does cost about $60 more at the moment, but I think that's worth it if you're willing to undervolt and overclock yourself. Prices will vary by region though. As covered earlier, the Y540 is significantly cheaper in my country, so that makes it an easier choice. If you just care about gaming performance, to summarize, if you aren't willing to work out how to tweak the Y540, the Helios 300 is tuned better out of the box and will give you better performance in most games. Just hit the turbo button and you're good to go. So which of these two gaming laptops would you pick? The Lenovo Y540 or Acer Helios 300? Let me know which and why down in the comments. I'm really interested to see which you would prefer. And if you're new to the channel, consider getting subscribed for future comparisons and tech videos like this one.